There we go. All right. So we are now recording, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick Bates, director of the Hunger Network. I'm a ordained deacon in the Lutheran Church, ELCA. And I want to thank you all for signing up for our Budgets Are a Moral Document Advocacy Day. I'm very excited this year. We have got buttons for folks that say, you can't see it probably on there, but Budgets Are a Moral Document is what they say. So I'm very excited because being branded when we walk around the state house so that everyone who sees us in the hallways and things will know what we're there for. So very excited about that. And I want to thank you all. This is going to be our biggest advocacy day that we have hosted as the Hunger Network. We have around 70 people right now who are signed up. And then for our briefing in the morning, we're actually going to be joined at Trinity Episcopal Church by some other organizations that will also be gathering with us that morning. So we'll probably have over 100 people starting the day off right. Really, really excited about that. I think it sends a strong message when so many people come down who are concerned about hunger in their communities and their hungry neighbors. All right. So I want to kind of begin with kind of the big picture, why budgets matter. Budgets are moral documents. That's the theme of our day. They set our priorities for our community. We need a roadmap. We need to know what our pathway is to get to a goal. Just saying we want to end hunger, that's not enough. We need our society and our community leaders to say, here's how we think we can do it. We might need some detours along the way. We might have to go back and backtrack a little bit here and there, and that's fine. But if we never try to lay out a roadmap to get there, we're never going to get to that destination. So in our budgets, we can invest to solve hunger. We can invest to build healthy homes and communities. We can invest to strengthen our schools and opportunities for children. We can invest to address healthcare inadequacies that are in our system. And I encourage you all, many of you have different social services you participate in, different passions and things like that. Bring your full self with you to this day. So if you are extremely passionate about education, bring that energy because all of these issues intersect with one another. But as we go into the budget, as you're meeting down with legislators, as you're thinking about how you're going to talk about these issues over the coming few days, remember that um, we are that budgets are about people and our communities. Let's see, I got a few things in the chat here. Oh, no images are showing up. Okay, hold on just a moment. Why is it saying? All right, let me know. Are the images showing up on the screen yet? No.
I see a slide that says budgets are moral documents and has your name on it.
All right, let's go back out. Oop. How about now? Can people see slides? All right,
Yes.
should be 4
Yes.
pictures. All right, there we go. Not quite sure what happened there. All right. So many of you might be wondering what you do to before you arrive downtown on Tuesday at Trinity Episcopal Church. I always say dress to impress. If you are clergy, wear that clergy collar, wear a stole, yarmulkes, habits, whatever. Wear the crosses, wear the signs of your faith because we bring our faith into this space. But if you're not clergy, you still have signs of your faith. You might have, I think many of us these days have one of those live generously t-shirts, regardless of faith tradition. Many people get those action grants and get a box full of t-shirts. You can wear those. If your church has a t-shirt or a polo with your branding and insignia on it, wear that. A God's Work Our Hands Sunday shirt. Regardless, many traditions have these things. Feel free to wear those shirts, wear those buttons, wear signs that say who you are. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, the majority of staff, lobbyists, legislators will be in business professionals. So feel free to wear that too. But you'll see people walking around in shorts and a t-shirt, all the way up to professional business suits. So dress as who you are and feel free to carry with you, represent who you are through what you wear. So we're going to begin the day at Trinity Episcopal Church, 125 East Broad Street. It's right across the street from the State House. I encourage people to have a parking plan. I have a slide on that next. Um, if you have business cards, if you run a pantry or a social service or a pastor at a church, bring your business cards to show like that you are in an official capacity. Um, and if you don't have that, you could bring information. If you volunteer at a place, you can bring information about that to pass along as well. We're going to provide everybody with folders. We'll go into more details in those shortly. But you'll have folders with all of our materials and information about all the policies. But remember, you are there to build a relationship. You are there to have conversations and to help them realize the policies we're talking about are not just budget numbers on a spreadsheet. They impact people and communities. So help to represent that as well. A lot of folks will try to look up their state representative and state senator. I encourage you to know who those individuals are. You can go to the Ohio legislature website, type in your address, and it'll give you that information. But I also want to make sure you're aware that people may or may not be meeting directly with your representatives. All right. We, instead of prioritizing individual districts, we're prioritizing key legislators on the finance committees, the education committees, the Ways and Means Committee, and the Children and Human Service Committee. The reason why we're targeting those individuals is because they are the ones working on our issues in this budget. Also, when you go down to the State House, you will have to go through security to get into the State House for those legislative meetings. And when you go to the Rife Center, where there's a lot of legislative office buildings, you will have to present a photo ID, a state ID, to get in there. If someone's a minor and doesn't have a state ID, the staff there is very accommodating to work around that as well. I was down there just a couple weeks ago with a bunch of high schoolers, and most of them did not have ID. And the staff there are amazing and worked with us. It was great. But make the process smooth, have your photo IDs. Check your bags. We do a lot of camping. Make sure you take your pocket knife out, basic, security procedures, right? Don't want to lose any of that or slow up the lines getting in there. Any questions about any of those things before you arrive? Yeah, the committees, Amy, are the finance committee, and they're the ones that lead on the state budget. The education committee, the children human service committee, and the ways and means committee, they do tax policy. So we will try to match people up within kind of our system. Now that I have all the registrations in, we're going to try to match people up so that we can have at least one or two constituents per group. But I also find there a lot of value in being with people from other parts of the state, because then you get a rich diversity of topics and experiences. Northwest Ohio, North and Southeast Ohio are extremely different places. So it's good to hear those stories and see where the commonalities exist. All right. So if you're not familiar with how the State House is, we're going to be starting over here at Trinity Episcopal Church at the corner of East Broad and South 3rd. So that's where you gather at 8:45 to 9 o'clock in the morning. Now, legislative meetings will not be at the church. You'll be going primarily over to the Rife Center that's down there in the lower left-hand corner at the corner of State and South High. So catty corner across the State House. So House of Representative members all have their offices in the Rife Center, and state senators have their meetings in the State House. And on the legislative folders, it will be very clear where you are going. And as I said, I encourage people to have a parking plan. If you just Google downtown Columbus parking or go to downtowncolumbus.com, it will give you an interactive map. The State House parking garage on Tuesday will probably be filled by 8:30 in the morning. You might get lucky and be able to park there. If you are downtown regularly, there is a phone app. They no longer have meters that you feed quarters into, but you can fill your meter and renew it straight from your phone if you're lucky enough to find street parking. I will say I probably will end up being parked on the street for the day. That's where I traditionally park when I'm downtown. but then there's multiple lots. I know there's one at the corner of State and Third, just a surface lot. And then there's also parking garages down at the corner of Town and Third, and then at Rich and Third. So you might have, so just plan accordingly for those parking logistics. So our schedule for the days, we're going to begin at 8:45 in the morning, and we are, instead of meeting in the basement at Trinity Episcopal, we are going to actually be meeting in the sanctuary, which I'm really excited about. There's, with the number of people we have, we'll be up, and I've already confirmed we can have our coffee in there. We'll have coffee and things set up. We'll have a couple of volunteers checking people in that morning. So since you all are registered, you'll just get checked off on that sheet and get your materials for the day. Around 9 o'clock, we're going to begin with our opening devotional. Our intern Sherry Miller is going to lead us in that. And then we'll do a budget overview, and then we'll do team preparation. So we're going to recover a lot of this Tuesday morning for those who aren't able to be on the call, and refreshers and hearing the same information to get multiple times. I always find helpful myself. And then our first set of meetings are at 10:30. So we only have about an hour 15 to prepare so that people can get in their groups and be headed out the door by 10:15 to those first meetings at 10:30. And again, each group will have a team leader, and the meetings and schedules will all be very clear as we put that together. Between 11 to 1, we are going to have lunches set up in the basement at Trinity Episcopal. It is handicap accessible from an elevator. And we can show you where that is before you all head over to the State House if that is needed. If you want to take your box lunch with you throughout the day, feel free, because they're going to be delivered at the same time as the coffee and scones in the morning from Freedom a la carte. And then at 12:30 that day, we're going to also do a press conference just because we have so many people coming to this event. We want to tell the media and legislators, look at how many people we had show up. Look at how many people care about these issues. So right now we're still kind of working on speakers and things for that, but just filling the room, the George Washington Williams room at the State House. Some of you might be walking out of a meeting or walking to a meeting, can come for part of it and not. And that's kind of the goal of this. We're also going to do prayers and singing in the George Washington Williams room that day. Any questions about the schedule? See, let me check the chat real quick. Yes, if you are leaving before 3:30, please email me what time you need to be out by, because most of our meetings are before 2 p.m., but we do have like 4 meetings, I think, at 2:30 and after. Just 3 or 4 meetings in that time frame. So it's easy to plan accordingly if I know in advance. Yep. Great question, Stacy. Thank you. So as I said, we will provide you all the materials that you will need for the day. You'll all get your buttons and a folder for you to keep with all you can make notes and things on. And in your folder, it's going to also have, you know, how to have a meeting, a budget 101 kind of worksheet that we're going to go over a little bit here today, and some of these things so that you can feel more confident in how to engage in these meetings. And then we're going to have these legislative folders. And on the labels, it's going to say the legislator's name, their office number, whether it's the Rife or the State House that you're meeting them in, and their room number, the time of the meeting, and then also what committees they are on. So that you're going to have all that information right in front of you. All you got to do is look at the outside of the folder. And in their folders, it's going to have a 2-page overview of all of our policy issues. We're able to summarize it in 2 pages. I often say if you can't summarize a single issue in a bulletin size insert, you need to go back and make sure you really understand it for those of us who draft these things. So real simple language on our policy issues. We'll go over those in a moment here. We also have information that district specific profile. So you might not be able to see these, but we have these kind of forms that kind of lay out any of the data on poverty and hunger and things in their districts, district by district for each legislator. Very excited. We've already got this printed out. And then we'll have some extra materials on some policy issues that they are concerned about. Let me check the chat here. I think we're good. All right. So when you go to a meeting, let's say you have an 11 a.m. meeting and it's your first meeting of the day, with a representative who's on the finance and education committee. You go into the Rife Center, you got four other people with you. First thing you're going to do when you go up in the elevators, Miss Joe at the security desk will scan you through, help you make sure you get to the right floor. You'll get to the right floor in the Rife Center. You'll go to the security desk on that floor. Hi, I'm here to have a meeting with Representative Smith at 11 o'clock. Who are you with? We're with the Hunger Network. Great, I'll call back. Then the staffer will come out, get your group, take you back to the meeting room. Uh, First thing you do is if it's staff or legislator, don't think they're like brushing us off because they give us staff. Staff are sometimes even more impactful than the legislator for these kind of meetings because they will be there and be able to advocate on our behalf after we leave, right? So staff are very important. Give your greeting, share who you are. Hi, I'm Nick Bates. I live in Columbus now. I work for a statewide organization. My wife and my mom and my dad are all teachers. Love to talk to you about some of these education issues. And I got two kids, real quick, real quick. Um, Name why you're there. Our policy asks or the asks. We're here to talk about some, four things we think you could do in this budget to reduce hunger in our communities. And then before you go in your meeting, we'll have time in that kind of hour 15 in the morning for you to meet with the four or five other people on your team to talk about who has stories, who wants to share a story. Um, and then take 2 to 3 minutes. Uh, my kids, we live in the hilltop and they've seen friends of theirs experience hunger at school and the difficulty that creates for them. That's the reason why I'm really excited about supporting school meals and expanding school meal access here in Ohio, right? Personalize it. Uh, Leave time at the end of your meeting um, for them to ask questions. And if they don't come up with any, ask them questions. What did you find interesting about our conversation today? Have you ever experienced it hunger? Have you ever volunteered at something? Ask those questions and then consistently and constantly repeat your asks. Hey, remember here in our folder, point out exactly, 1, 2, 3, 4 are what we're hoping you can help support. Any questions on how a legislative meeting should go? And then at the end of the meeting, be sure to thank them, shake their hand, offer opportunities for follow up, and all of that as well. Any questions about legislative meetings? The big thing I want to emphasize to everybody is that when you're in a legislative meeting, they're human beings. Sometimes they forget that they're just mere mortals like the rest of us, and they don't know everything. In fact, you all are probably more knowledgeable by the end of this call on our four policy issues than a lot of them are, even though many of them are being paid to know about all this stuff, but they're also being paid to understand what kind of asphalt should we be using in our roads and how exactly what is a mill and what is inside millage and outside millage and how often do we need to be having forest fires to properly maintain Ohio forests? They have to try to understand all these things. So we can help make them experts in our issue as well. Yeah, great question, Missy. How long is each meeting? Each meeting is probably can be as short as 10 to 15 minutes. And I don't think I've ever seen a meeting, constituent meeting last longer than a half an hour. So sometimes you got to be real, real quick. Other times you get a little bit more time. So that's something you can ask it when you go in about how much time do you think you have today? Or if you go in at 11 o'clock and if they don't say anything, assume you got about 20 minutes. All right. So we're coming to this budget conversation as advocates with our priorities around hunger in our communities. But the reality is the table's already set for what the legislators and the media want to be talking about. And also the policies that exist. So some of the policies that are kind of overhanging and that we are building our current budget on. The big one is that we've had 13 income tax cuts over the past 20 years. And this has shifted about 20 billion, or has shifted billions of dollars of revenue, about $12 billion, I believe, out of our budget. So when people come in, new legislators don't know this. They come and say, "Hey, let's cut taxes." It's like we've already done this, right? But this is one of those big issues that sucks a lot of energy out of the room. The other big issue is school funding. As we have heard, about 4 years ago, they passed the Fair School Funding Plan, a bipartisan effort that tries to look at the balance between state and local revenue, what can each afford to pay. But with the recent update in property evaluations throughout the state and property values rising, the state says now, well, local communities could afford to pay a lot more revenue for the school. So as the governor proposed the budget, he's actually says he's updating funding for the updating money, increasing money, but it's actually $103 million of a budget cut for public schools in Ohio. Um, so the big thing that public education advocates have been pushing out is making sure you update those inputs. So you can't look at 2022 costs and numbers with 2025, 2026 property valuations. You need to update how much it costs to educate a kid today with inflation. And theoretically, that would probably fix this cut for a lot of districts that have been growing, have more students now. I think Columbus is going to take a $45 million cut, which is the entire recent levy that the city of Columbus passed a year or so ago. So that's a big issue that's on everybody's mind. And I'm not saying this because we're going in to talk about this, but be ready that this is kind of the big thing that they're focused on. And so we have to figure out, and when we're communicating, recognize what they care about so that we can try to communicate about what we care about as well. The other one of the other big issues is as they're looking at school funding, because school funding represents about 42% of state generated revenue expenses. So nearly half of all state generated money, tax dollars, that they bring in are going towards education. Right now, about $1 billion of those are going to vouchers. So that, and they've realized that a lot of it's going to wealthy kids that might not need that voucher. So there's a lot of kind of push and pull on that issue as well. Obviously, there's a lot of economic troubles, rising healthcare costs, rising childcare costs, housing, and property taxes. One of the impacts of those 13 income tax cuts is shifted costs down to the local level. So now local communities have been raising property taxes and trying to raise revenue locally, and we've seen the disparate impact of those policies. One of the other things that legislators keep trying to say is, well, this is a tight budget. This is not a tight budget. We have revenue. There is revenue growth in the budget. Economic indicators have been looking positive as they write this budget, but they no longer have COVID dollars coming in. So they have to, and they were very cautious in how they spent the COVID dollars, so they weren't overly relying on them for ongoing expenses. So it's not a tight budget, it's a normal budget. So that's kind of the table on which that we're coming into. These are the big issues that our legislative leaders are focused on right now. And we can see, especially with those economic troubles and public school funding, and we can see on how hunger intersects with these, but we want to help elevate hunger as an issue. Any questions? So just an example of kind of where we're at now. Job growth in Ohio has been historically slower and below the national average. Um, whether you look at it from 2005 when we began a lot of tax cuts, whether you look at it from the pandemic, from 2020, March of 2020, we've been trailing the nation. So this creates a lot of anxiety and concern among legislators and community members as they try to do. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, ARPA is the American Rescue Plan Act. It was some of the post COVID dollars that came into the state to shore up state budgets. Yeah, great question, Missy. Food insecurity in Ohio is on the rise right now. Some people say, well, it's below the 16% that we saw after the Great Recession. But I like to look back to 25 years ago just because it's a nice, easy number. And we used to be below the national average for food insecurity, and we used to be below 10%. To me, that's where I would like to get back to um, as the first goal, and then say, can we get it below 5%? And we can see these things in the budget. So if you adjust for inflation over the past 25 years, school funding has been up and down. Higher education spending is down by more than $1 billion. Health and human service spending. So this is foster care programs, food banks, anti-poverty efforts, some special mental health programs, all these things. We have dramatically cut funding um, over the past 25 years for these services. Any questions on any of that? So, Sue, does school funding include vouchers? The That money is traditionally done outside of the traditional school funding plan. So you have your school funding formula, foundation funding. So that's what that was looking at. Yeah. So the voucher funding would be separate. Yeah, and these are charts are adjusted for inflation. All right. So in early February, the governor introduced his proposal. The House began hearings, and the House has already had their amendment deadline. It is earlier than I have ever seen it in Ohio. So they submitted over 1,700 amendments by House members um, to modify the governor's budget. That is a lot of changes that are likely coming to what the governor proposed. The House plans to pass their budget on the 9th. So the week before, that week of March 31st, we expect to see what we call the substitute bill. So the House will unveil their budget just 1 week after we're there. So we are there at a key time to help have an impact on these budget negotiations and considerations, especially because a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about, I would say, we're in March Madness time, and everyone talks about the teams on the bubble, right? The teams on the bubble. Are they going to get in? Are they going to get out? I'd say a lot of our policy issues are on the bubble, right? So us being there next week is really a great opportunity to hopefully push them into the final version. But then I shouldn't call it the final version because then the Senate will begin their process on this budget. They hope to pass their budget in late May, early June. And then a conference committee will take the governors, the House, and the Senate, three very different budgets, and try to reconcile them at that time in June. Some additional things that are kind of dominating the conversation right now. The school funding formula is obviously a major issue. Medicaid. So Medicaid, remember, is health insurance for low income folks and people with different types of special needs and special populations. Medicare is administered at the federal level. Medicaid is primarily federally funded, but administered at the state. One of the big concerns right now is the governor included language around Medicaid that says if the federal government changes around the funding agreement, they're going to eliminate Medicaid expansion for 770,000 people. This is very concerning because that's a lot of people that could very quickly lose their Medicaid. So right now, that Medicaid expansion population, the federal government pays 90 cents on the dollar. For every dollar of Medicaid we spend, remember that's paying for nurses and home health care assistants and primary care visits and a lot of other important work that create jobs, generate economic activity could go away very, very quickly if this trigger language remains in. So there's been a lot of conversation about that. And then there's obviously the sin tax issue. The governor proposed doubling the tax on marijuana, tobacco, and sports betting. The sports betting revenue would go directly for stadium, a special account that stadiums could kind of tap into when they want public funding for stadiums. Instead, the legislature looks like they want to do a $600 million bond package to fund the Cleveland Browns stadium. I'm a Clevelander. I'm allowed to make that joke. Lifelong Browns fan. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of one of the tensions right now. The big thing with that tobacco tax revenue is the governor said he wants to increase the tobacco tax specifically to pay for the child tax credit that we're going to come to in a minute. And the legislature does not have much interest in raising these sin taxes. So the specific policies that we are going to be talking about, and again, you'll have all this written out, and I'm hoping that final version's done by the end of tomorrow to be able to send out. But it's like I'm getting updates on amendments and language and things we're changing. Trying to make sure we have the most up to date information for everybody. So the first issue is our food banks. The governor reduced the food banks back to pre-COVID levels of funding, even though hunger has gone up. So the amendment that we are encouraging for folks to support is to restore that funding cut and then adjust their funding support for inflation. Now, a lot of people say, wait a second, what do you mean by food bank spending? Our food pantry at our church doesn't take government money. But if your food pantry receives shipments from the Mid Ohio Food Collective or the Cleveland Food Bank or the Akron Canton Food Bank or those 12 regional food banks around Ohio, they are purchasing the fresh produce and vegetables and meats and dairy and all those things. That all comes from government contracts where we are able to purchase food from local farms, the excess produce that they wouldn't sell in the market. It's the ugly apples, because an apple doesn't always look like this perfect little beautiful thing that we buy at Kroger. And it gets that into our food pantry system. So the things to emphasize with this is it supports farmers. All the majority of nutritious food that we're able to offer in our emergency food system come from these contracts. It's also got that multiplier effect. Every time you donate $1, we're able to, the food banks are able to turn around and give you $10 worth of food through that. So that's our first policy ask. The second one is around school meals. So right now, we have been encouraging universal meals. The amendment that has been drafted tries to increase the eligibility from 185% of the federal poverty level up to 225% of the federal poverty level. That's going to catch a lot of students who are right on the verge. Maybe at the beginning of the year, they're not quite hungry, but they could be. Later on, that's one flat tire, that's one broken furnace, it's one healthcare scare for their family. That puts people into a crisis situation where they can't put food on the table. So for kids to learn, we know they need food. It would also create a universal breakfast program. So as kids show up, they are beginning the day with food in their bellies. And we've heard from teachers and things. If you've ever been in education, kids can't learn hungry. Our third policy area is this child tax credit that I mentioned. The governor included this in his budget proposal. So Governor DeWine wants to create up to $1,000 child tax credit for kids that are 6 and under. It'd be 5% of your earned income. So you got to make at least $2,500 to qualify, and it caps out at $1,000. So once you have $20,000 worth of income, you're receiving the full credit up until you start getting into upper income levels, and then it begins to phase out for upper income earners. But the vast, vast, vast majority of households with kids 6 and under would get about $1,000 extra a year in their pockets. And we know that, in those early years, kids are sick at least 10, the average is like 10 times a year for kids in daycare and preschool getting just minor upper respiratory infections, but the kid gets sent home. That's days people are missing out of work. It'll equips families to make their own choices. Do we work part-time or full-time or grandma or, how we balance those early years before kids get into the K-12 school systems and, have full day programs, helps families be able to make those choices themselves. And our final priority area is safe, decent, and affordable housing. So the way it works in Ohio is there's a trust fund that generates fees from county recorders. But when there's not a lot of real estate activity going on, that fund kind of drops down a little bit lower. What we are saying is that even in lower years, you should fill it up to the $65 million cap. Some years it generates 65 million. Some years it generates a lot more. Back in 2021, when everybody was refinancing their house, that was a lot of county recorder fees coming in, and it generated more money that year because who didn't refinance with a mortgage in 2021 when interest rates were 2.5%, 3%. for those who are homeowners. But this would help guarantee some more stability and funding of housing and homeless services in Ohio. Kit, no, the kid asked if the child tax credit will be fully refundable. Yes, it's the way it appears that it is written right now. It will be refundable. So if you make 20,000, it's five. It's written as 5% of your income. So if you're only making $10,000 a year, you're only going to get 500 back. But you figure anybody who makes less than about $26,000 in Ohio doesn't actually pay any state income tax. So it would have very little impact if it didn't have that refundability built into it. All right. So as I mentioned, when we go into legislative meetings, you're going to have the opportunity to tell your stories. And I think this is the most important part. There's all the data, all the policy. I've been in meetings for the past 2 months with these folks, trying to talk about the policies and the nuances, as well as friends from a lot of other partner organizations. I love being a network because it means I get to work with just about everybody under the sun, it seems like. But the values that you bring in are telling your stories, telling the stories of your communities and your and ministries and programs that you are connected to. So try to think about, on those four issues: housing, food banks, school meals, raising children. Um, so even if you're like, well, I've never been hungry, I've never volunteered. If you have kids, or nieces or nephews, what would a difference of $1,000 have made in those early years? Right. I mean, I think back to myself, I'm like, oh my gosh, that would give me so much. I would have a lot fewer gray hairs up here with that extra $1,000 when my kids were younger. So think about the story you want to tell in about and be able to tell it in 2 to 3 minutes. Make it personal. Don't focus on a lot of statistics. Look at only one or two statistics to work in. And then when you tell your story, figure out how to draw it in the larger issue with our clear policy asks for legislators. So, for example, I was at a breakfast program volunteering one day on a Sunday morning, serving homeless and unhoused neighbors and other people who were struggling. And I was talking to a young gentleman. He was probably in his mid 20s. And he was telling me about how he had been struggling in school and ended up having to drop out because of some mental health issues that he just couldn't have access to healthcare for. And it became one thing when he had to drop out of school to try to focus a little bit more on work, and then had to stop working, was struggling to work as much, and then lost his job, and then he lost his housing, and this cascading effect. But as he was telling me this story, he was so proud of the artwork that he could do. And because he was in art school and he was showing it to me and talking about um, all of the different projects he had worked on with different companies and things like that previously. And it was such a shame for me to see somebody with such talent and such gifts that could be benefiting our community so much to be struggling to put and spending all of his energy now trying to find shelter every night and to keep food on the table. But the reality is about 30% of Ohioans live at 200% of federal poverty level or less. They're one healthcare crisis, one broken car away from being hungry. And we can see through him how people can spiral out of control so quickly. And then I thought about to myself on how I could be very quickly spiraling out of control if I lost my job or my wife lost her job or something happened. And so the reality is we're in a moment now where we can help shore up some economic security for those households and provide the kind of safety net and support to keep people from spiraling out of control by expanding food bank funding, by making sure that we have this child tax credit in place, by um, investing in safe, decent, and affordable housing. So see, I started with a story about just volunteering and talking to a guy, and I was able to shift into an opportunity, a call, and kind of expand it with that 30% statistic. Look at there are all these other people that are in this, right on the edge right now, and we can do something about it. We can make the investments we need. So think about those kind of stories that you might have and might be able to share as well. So some of the things that we often hear when you're in your legislative meetings, legislators say, well, I'd really love to do it, but this is a tight budget. We just can't afford any of that right now. I encourage you to say something, right now, you can respond with something like, we fund our priorities. And I hope hungry Ohioans are a priority. This isn't Democrat or Republican. This isn't left or right or big government or small government or any of these things. Is our hungry Ohioans a priority for our legislators? If you want to get into it, you could just say, yeah, and it's fine to say, what, investing in hungry Ohioans, figuring out how to pay for it, that's on you all. That's why you have a big Ways and Means Committee to figure out the ways and the means to fund stuff. Um, we actually have identified a policy proposal that people could be looking at. This was actually had a lot of bipartisan support back in 2019. That legislators did actually vote on and adopt in the House. The Senate did not support it at that time, but the House did. To limit a business loophole from $250,000 down to $100,000 as the cap. So still over 80% of Ohioans who claim this tax credit still were able to benefit from it fully because most people aren't making over $100,000. But then it equipped people to have that revenue, $526 million to fund other important services. Another common response. So right now at the Ohio State House, we do have a supermajority Republican House and a supermajority Republican Senate, a Republican court, and a Republican governor. It's called a trifecta state, where one party controls all three branches of government. But sadly, one of the things we often hear from folks is, well, we're not in the majority, so of course we support you, but there's nothing we can do about it. But that's a way they're actually avoiding responsibility as well, from the party in the minority. So if somebody asks this to you, says this to your group, we encourage you to say something like, will you make a commitment to talk with a member of the majority about supporting these amendments? Or who should we be talking to in the majority that could support these amendments? Because they are on committees with these people. They are, so they see them in hallways and things, and they have that opportunity to build those relationships and help us build those relationships as well. There's also a lot of concern right now about the federal government. Obviously, the federal government is cutting a lot of spending, and a lot of that spending, about a third, almost a third of the state budget, are federal funds. So it's sometimes one of these things where the federal government says, we're cutting this program and it's wasted. We're not cutting any direct spending. It's because that money comes to the state and the state administers the program. So what we're, if people are express these concerns, um, the big line that, and this is a struggle, it's a very real concern, but there's been uncertainty in the past at the federal level. So we can't allow Washington to get, we can't get in the habit of allowing Washington to make our priority choices for us. We need to make our choices now, wait to see what Washington does, and then we need to adjust once we see how Washington impacts funding. So I'm just now looking at the chat. Pastor Carl asked, how is support in the Senate and the House now for closing the LLC loophole? That's a very good question, and I'm hoping to have an answer to it. We are going around, not a lot of people want to come out very publicly and say, yes, let's close a bunch of this specific tax loophole publicly until they know they have support. And that's one thing with even people who support us, they need to hear from us and they need to, so that they have the courage to speak publicly on these issues. Um, so we're not sure how much support there is now. A lot, with term limits, a lot of people that were around in 2019 are no longer there. So we're talking to people and trying to figure that out. Yeah, so Emily, that's a great comment about unhoused folks not always voting. Low-income folks, people on our food pantry lines are also less likely statistically to be engaging in the voting process. So what we are encouraging, I think that's one of where we come in as faith-based advocates, is to say, well, you know what, we might be, middle income, upper income individuals ourselves. But we can still lift up and amplify their voices. In our work. Yeah, altruism is not always a trait of our legislators. That's true. And there's a lot of good economic reasons, with the food banks. It's good for Ohio farmers. It's good for Ohio businesses. School meals, it helps schools stabilize their local budgets for meal service. Child tax credit, you give low middle income families $1,000 a year with young children. They're immediately going to go and buy more food, more clothes for their kids, pay for camps, and those other things. That's a good economic stimulator. So yeah, definitely lean into those arguments as well. Are there additional questions? That was my last slide, and I think, oh, look at that, 12:47. So I'm going to kind of conclude our recording section of this call. So thank you for those who are watching this on recording at a later time. And then we can have about 10 minutes or so with those who are on the call today to finish our conversation. Let me